What's the longest book of Tanach? What's the longest biblical book? The internet search might not actually yield you the right results, and the reason for this is that the Christians, when they were translating the Bible, divided certain books into two, and that's not our tradition. We only have 24 books of the written Torah, and in particular the book of Kings, Malachim, is all one. There's no first and second Kings. And similarly, the book of Shmuel is one, and the book of Divrei Yamim, the Chronicles, is all one. So what's the longest book of Tanakh according to our division? Out of the 24 books, what's the longest? One might assume that it's one of the three books I just mentioned, and that's why, in fact, the Christians divided them into two, because they were very long. So the main candidates seem to be either the book of Malachim, or the book of Shmuel, or the book of Divrei Yamim. So the question is, which one is the longest? Turns out that the book of Malachim is the longest one. Now, I must qualify here that by longest, I mean longest by, let's say, the number of words or letters. We're not talking about chapters. The chapter division, by the way, is also was done at the same time period when the Bible was translated into Latin, and we don't have the same chapter division. We don't really have any chapter division. We have what's called parshiot, and in particular, the fact that there are this many chapters in Sefer Malachim doesn't really mean anything for us. But if one would be counting the chapters, then obviously the Sefer Tehillim, the Psalms, is the longest. The reason for this being that the Psalms generally have relatively short verses, and also the Psalms themselves are relatively short. An average psalm might have slightly more than 10 verses, and an average chapter in other books of the Torah is much longer. So that's why if you go by the number of actual chapters, then Tehillim, the Psalms, has 150, so that's the longest. But obviously that's not really the best definition of being long. I would say that the number of letters or words matters much more than the number of chapters, because the number of chapters depends on the division. In a similar vein, we could say that the longest tractate is Shabbat, not Bava Batra, even though the number of pages, when people learn Daf Yomi, in the cycle where they learn 1 page a day, the Bava Batra is the longest tractate. But the reason for this is obvious, because Rashi died before finishing his commentary on Bava Batra, and his grandson Rashbam is printed instead of Rashi on most of the tractate. And Rashbam happens to be a much longer commentator. He uses much more words. He's much more elaborative. Rashi is very short. So the average page of the Talmud, starting some 20-something page after Rashi died, the average page becomes much smaller in the Talmud, much larger in Rashbam's commentary. So that's why Bava Batra is the longest tractate, but it's not really the longest. If you go by the number of words or the number of letters, Shabbat is the longest tractate. Similarly, I would say that the number of chapters is not really so relevant as the number of words or letters. And by that, as I mentioned, Malachim is the longest book. And which book is the shortest? Again, you have to be careful. Our sages put together all the 12 what they call minor prophets, the 12 prophets who are short, they put it as one book. So that's why the answer is not going to be Ovadia. If you'd go by the number of words in Ovadia or number of letters, it's the shortest prophet, but it's not a separate book. Trei Asar, 12 minor prophets, is all one manuscript. Today it's in print, but it used to be written in manuscripts, and one big manuscript was for 12 minor prophets. That's why we definitely do not consider that a small book. So then one would assume that the candidates are among the Megillot. Those seem to be the smaller books of Tanakh. So one might guess that it's either Eicha, Lamentations, or the book of Rut. And the answer is it's the book of Rut, both by the number of chapters and by the number of letters or words. The book of Rut is slightly smaller than the book of Eicha. So the shortest book of Tanakh is Rut. The longest book of Tanakh is Malachim.